Hello and welcome to the Rover podcast. Today we're joined by Ronnie Cantrell. I used to row with Ronnie at Brooks for a little bit, and he's now coaching over in the US. So, Ronnie, introduce yourself a little bit.
Hello, Ben. Thank you for having me. Like Ben said, my name is Ronnie. I currently coach for Saratoga Rowing Association, which is a club team out in New York, but I've had a variety of experiences with coaching through the junior level, through the scholastic level, some national team stuff, and then collegiate as well. And then rowing wise, yeah, I rowed with Ben at Brooks. Had a great time there. It was not as fast as Ben, but still enjoyed my time. And then prior to that, I had rowed all 4 years in high school for Skyline High School in Michigan.
Mhm. And so you started off in Michigan, and that's where you're from. So, how did you sort of get into rowing? Is there a big rowing scene there?
Yeah, so it's pretty decent. I would say we actually have a pretty unique situation with having three high schools within our city
Hmm.
that all have rowing teams, which I think is
Yeah.
a bit rare in that part of the country.
Okay.
And of course, in Ann Arbor, you have University of Michigan Women, who are a fantastic Division I women's program. You know, year by year, they're normally sitting in the top 10. And then you have Michigan Men, which is a club program, but they've won every club national championship in history for men's
Hmm.
rowing. It's a lot of procedure there, a pretty big community around it as well. But the way I joined was I was a competitive swimmer for a long, long time. So from when I was real little till about eighth grade. By the time I got to eighth grade, I was pretty burnt out,
Yeah.
um, ready to move on with my life. And the Skyline High School coach, he would go to different middle schools around Ann Arbor,
Hmm.
and just kind of talk up rowing and like how it's just a great opportunity, and it's a sport that anybody can do and anybody can start at any time, which
Hmm.
was definitely super intriguing to me,
Yeah.
because just being a competitor, I didn't want to try to join one of the football team, something like that, and know that I'm 8 years behind everybody else and it's going to take
Yeah.
me forever to figure it out. I'm never going to feel super comfortable until the end of my high school time. And so the aspect of like, yeah, just come in,
Hmm.
try it out. Like there's no prior experience needed.
Hmm.
Um, but I will say the biggest reason why I joined, this is also why my doubles partner joined as well. And we had a pretty successful career in high school. Um, is when my coach came to my middle school. His name is Kit. He's actually from the UK.
Oh, really?
Um, but he came to the middle school and he brought one of the varsity men, who I believe was a senior or a junior at the time. I had 1 year with him when I was actually on the team. Um, with just this, you know, really big athletic dude.
Hmm.
And me and my doubles partner, we looked at him and we were like, yep, we want to look like that.
Yeah.
So it seems like rowing is the way to go. Um, but so that's how I got into the sport.
Yeah. Didn't quite reach the reach the form, huh?
No, I did. Unfortunately, I did not grow too much after eighth grade. I grew outward over upward. So didn't end up looking quite like him, but we still got the job done. We
Yeah.
still, yeah, we still did
Yeah.
some things.
And so what sort of competitions and how you said you did well with your doubles partner? How did you go and where did you go?
Yeah, so my high school team was all sculling.
Hmm.
So again, with my coach being from the UK, he went to Durham University and he
Okay.
rowed for Thames
Okay.
prior to that. And then he didn't row for Durham, but he coached for Durham
Yeah.
a little bit while he was over there before coming to the US and starting my program. Um, but competition wise, like in the sculling world in the US, there's not a whole lot
Hmm.
there, right? We're very, very sweep oriented, like especially, once you get to the collegiate level on the women's side, there's no sculling whatsoever, right? Like
Okay.
everything is geared towards the sweep boats.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that definitely adds to me and my partner's success. His name is Jesse. Um, to Jesse and that success because there just wasn't a whole lot of people who were sculling
Hmm.
at the time, and especially like at a higher level,
Yeah.
right? We could say the same thing with the reverse effect. When we swept, it was definitely not as pretty as when we sculled because again we were a sculling program. But No, we race locally quite a bit. And then our big race in the spring was always Midwest Scholastics, which
Hmm.
is the regional championship for the Midwest for high school programs.
Hmm.
Um, but for scholastic teams. So like there's scholastic rowing and then there's junior rowing in the US. Scholastic rowing means that you're directly affiliated to the high school. So like you're a part of that high school and you can only row for the team if you go to that school.
Yeah.
So the same thing if like I was going to go join the Skyline basketball team or the Skyline football team or whatever it may be, like
Hmm.
I have to go to Skyline and that team is Skyline,
Hmm.
right? Versus a
Okay.
juniors program, um, anybody can be a part of that.
Hmm.
Like you could live 90 minutes away from the boathouse, and if you want to make that drive every single day, you can go row for that team.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so they separate those categories um, for a fairness aspect
Hmm.
of just because again, like my high school team, we can only pull from kids from our high school,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
We
Versus,
we didn't have that in the UK, and I think, as far as I'm aware, even at Nat schools now, you still have like club boats and schools against each other, and it would
yeah,
always be sort of like Leander,
yeah,
Marlow, Henley, like winning the races. And although you've obviously got Windsor Boys and all the sort of private schools in sweeping as well that are doing well for themselves, but as a
yeah,
sculler, like we'd be going up like racing down Nat schools, like sort of in doubles or singles or whatever, and sort of it'd be all of the sort of bigger clubs winning
yeah.
stuff
No,
generally.
no, exactly. I like to like all these club programs too, because again, it's like you're paying a little bit more money, it's a little bit more serious. Like
Hmm.
these kids are training double the amount that
Hmm.
scholastic high school kids are training, right? And that's not to say that, you won't ever have a boat that's a high school team that won't go and do well against junior programs. Like we've seen it happen many times at youth nationals. You'll get some stellar eight from a high school, from a scholastic program who were out there and really, putting some work against club teams. But
Hmm.
generally, just the standard of speed is very different.
Hmm.
Um, but so yeah, so we would go down there, which was in Ohio, and it's the entire Midwest region. So all the states that um, create the Midwest in the U.S., all their scholastic high school programs would race here.
Okay.
Um, and if you get, it might be depending on the event, it's either top two or first
Hmm.
to get a bid to go race at nationals.
Yeah.
And
And did
every
you qualify?
region, what do you say?
Did you ever qualify?
Yes, I did. I was very fortunate to we won 6 times
Hmm.
throughout my sophomore to senior year, which was super exciting. So I was able to race the nationals between
Hmm.
sophomore and senior year. Um, 2 events each year. When we got to scholastics, we always prioritize one.
Yeah.
But Midwest, we would usually put out a couple more crews with athletes doubling up so we can do well in the points trophy
Yeah.
also. Like it was always
Okay.
a really big goal um, for my program in high school to see how well we can do at that race
Hmm.
and see how many boats we can qualify for nationals.
Hmm.
But like our main goal was Midwest because everybody gets to go to it, right?
Yeah.
It's a full team environment. You don't have to qualify to race at
Hmm.
the regional championship. You just enter and you go.
Hmm.
Um, which definitely adds like a whole different type of feel and vibe to it because it's okay, like, you know, if we win the sculling trophy, like it's
Hmm.
not just because me and Jesse won the double,
Yeah.
right? It's because all of the boys squad and all of the women's squad really did what we've all been working towards all year.
Hmm.
And we're able to put together a race day. And now this is achievement the team got.
Yeah.
Um, so then post that, our next biggest race would be Scholastic Nationals, which normally happens in New Jersey. It moves around slightly, but most of the time it's on the East Coast. And there we were able to get some medals throughout that run. Never was able to get on top of the podium, but multiple top three finishes, which was exciting. And then post that, which that high school team doesn't actually do anymore because of COVID.
Hmm.
Um, we would go race at Canadian Nationals.
Oh, nice.
Um, at Canadian Nationals, it's called schoolboys and it's the exact same thing. So it's only scholastic rowing. So club
Hmm.
teams also can't race in that. Canadian teams can come down to the US nationals as well.
Yeah.
So we say US and Canada, but like you can race it either.
Hmm.
And Canadian nationals was also a super fun one, because that's a regatta you don't have to qualify for either.
Hmm.
And so the way that season progresses, it goes Midwest nationals, US nationals, and Canadian nationals. And so like we have full team Midwest, and then really small team for US nationals, and they're about like a week to 2 weeks apart each. And then the whole team comes together again for Canadian nationals.
Okay.
So like it's fun to see everybody there, and like the level of speed at Canadian nationals and sculling is no joke.
Yeah.
You know, we were able to make, you know, multiple A finals, and we got fourth a couple times, and my sophomore year was able to get second, which was exciting. Like that race is really big for Canadian national team junior boats.
Hmm.
And so of course you'll get, you know, national team rowers at US nationals too, but like Canadian nationals, they have a double that they know they want to go race at trials, or that's going to go to Pan or whatever. Like they'll usually race that line up there.
Hmm.
And so the speed is just, it's a whole nother game.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that was our big things scholastically. In the fall, we only went to Heather Charles one time.
Okay.
Just because it's just such an expensive trip. Like it's an amazing regatta, right?
Hmm.
Like it's stellar race, really cool environment, like great people. You get to see, you know, everybody you've ever known in your entire rowing career there.
Hmm.
But like price wise and competitiveness, it didn't really make sense for us to go every year.
Hmm.
Like I think it'd be different, you know, if we had a crew that was going to go out and we had a good shot of like, oh, we're going to get top 5.
Yeah.
Like this is our year.
Hmm.
But you know, we weren't at that speed. So like you're racing against club teams and stuff at that level. And so we went one year in the 8, didn't do too hot, and never went again. But so all of our big stuff was in the spring.
Hmm.
We do a couple oh, you're good.
Back again now. Yeah, you were saying you did a couple.
Yeah, so they're we call them ergatas. I don't know
Okay.
if that's a real
I can't
term
say I've heard
or
that
not.
before, but I'm sure I can figure out what it is.
Yeah, okay. So but it's basically it's these massive indoor races.
Mhm.
Where they'll have like 3 rows of 10 or 12 ergs or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
All connect to the big screen, and you know, you're racing 2Ks.
Yeah.
So we do about 3 of those in the winter. And then that would kind of wrap up our year. So pretty easy fall, you know, longer distance in the fall, 5 to 6Ks, nothing super prestigious race wise.
Mhm.
Then winter, getting in that 2K practice, doing those ergatas, and then the spring is our championship season.
Yeah.
But the one really, again, like being in Arbor and having all these teams, all these high school teams, my coach started Washington Rowing Center, which is a club program, and that brings together everybody. So anybody can be a part of that.
Mhm.
It only runs throughout the summer for about 2 months.
Mhm.
With at the end of the camp, us going and racing at Canadian Henley,
Okay.
which isn't, of course, it's not Royal Henley, right? Nothing compares to Royal Henley. But still, it's an extremely quick race.
Mhm.
And
Is it
like,
6-lane racing?
oh man, I think it might be a little bit bigger than that.
Oh, really?
So it's in St. Catharines, and that's where Worlds is next year.
Okay.
And so they've had Worlds there before, I think
Mhm.
sometime in the 90s, something like a while back. Don't
Mhm.
quote me on that. That could be very wrong.
Yeah.
But they've had it there before,
Okay.
and they're bringing it back this year. So it's like a really established
Mhm.
venue.
Yeah.
But that was always really cool because like that was our time when we can go and see, okay, like how do we actually compare to the club rowers?
Mhm.
Right? Like we don't get a race this scene all year long, and now, you know, here's our shot.
Yeah.
And so it's been really cool as well seeing how that program has progressed
Mhm.
throughout the years as well. So like through that team, you know, I was pretty lucky to be the first one to make a final
Yeah.
for them at Canadian Henley, you know, in the U17 single. And like as we move forward, like starting to really start to inch on those results. So like the highest I ever got was fourth.
Yeah.
And then these past couple of years, we had a women's U19 4 get third, and then they got second. Um, and so it's cool seeing those worlds kind of mesh a little bit,
Hmm.
and just seeing that like rowing as a whole in the junior level is getting quicker.
Yeah.
And it's not only, these club, like it's not impossible as a scholastic athlete to compete against junior rowers.
Yeah. And are you going to see more junior rowers in the US and doing well at world championships? So they do pretty well in the 8 usually, and that's those sort of boats. But do you think sculling could be growing and sort of just generally growing at junior worlds and those sort of events?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say yes, but I don't think so. I'll always be biased towards sculling. Like
Okay.
I when I first started rowing, it was sculling,
Hmm.
right? When I was, we competed at a very high level in sculling. All of our coaching was oriented around sculling, and like I think the benefits as a junior of knowing how to scull and
Hmm.
really understanding like this is how you move your body, like this is how these little tweaks affect the shell, and like this is what rhythm and flow feels like, and just all those
Yeah.
basics I think really help to build a good sweep rower.
Hmm.
So I do think it's a bit unfortunate that we don't
Yeah.
prioritize scaling as much. um to be honest, I didn't really pay attention too closely this past summer with how sculling boats did, but I know they didn't do too hot.
Okay.
um but like on the women's, but then you get the reverse side of it, and you get to the women's Olympic team,
Hmm.
and they're crushing it right now in sculling.
Okay. Yeah.
And so like our women's double, they got third at Worlds this past year or this
Hmm.
past summer. The women's quad qualified for an Olympic spot. I don't, they were in the B final at Worlds. I don't remember exactly what they got, but they got the bid.
Hmm.
Um, and so it is cool to see sculling be a little more represented there, but I think like as a whole, there could be more,
Yeah.
right? But also the US system really isn't set up for
Hmm.
sculling.
Yeah.
Like again, like once you go to college, you'll never scull
Hmm.
ever again in a race,
Yeah.
right? Especially on the women's side. Like the women's national championship events, it's 1v8, 2v8, and then 1v4.
Because women's collegiate rowing, it's NCAA, isn't it? Whereas the
Yeah.
men's is IRAs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that does that run like completely separately?
Yeah. So it's two separate national championships. Um, IRAs as well is a lot more deep event wise.
Hmm.
And so like the IRA event list is absolutely massive, and which will include sculling in it.
Yeah.
Um, whereas the women's championship isn't.
Yeah.
Um, I think too, like team wise, you'll get a lot more teams at IRAs than you will at NCAA's, because again, there's just so few events.
Hmm.
It ends up limiting the amount of spots
Yeah.
as well. But yeah, completely separate entities. You will have men's programs in the US who are funded
Hmm.
by the university. Like you got teams like, University of Washington men or Yale or Cal or whoever.
Hmm.
But for the most part, between the two NCAA programs, because they operate under that governing body, it orients a little differently
Okay.
than the men's side will.
Do you think that there's room for IRAs to sort of be cut out and sort of everything moved towards NCAA's? Is that ever going to happen, or do you think that's even worth doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be cool.
Yeah.
Again, like I think the more spotlight you can bring to the sport, and like the more athletes you can get in a venue, the more quick athletes you can get in a venue, like the
Hmm.
better.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll ever happen,
Hmm.
just because again, like it's just completely two separate bodies, and men's
Yeah.
rowing isn't a part of the NCAA.
Hmm.
Um, maybe that will change one day,
Hmm.
but usually when they're bringing up sports or whatever, decisions they're making, rowing isn't on that list.
Yeah.
Um, so definitely would be cool, but if that happens, I think it'll be long after we're gone
Yeah.
before any change would be made of that. But
Yeah. And do you think you sort of mentioned rowing being in the spotlight? Do you think because women's rowing is NCAA, do you think that gets more of a spotlight than men's rowing in the US?
oh, 100%. 100%. So women's rowing in the US is actually a very, very massive sport.
Okay.
Women's rowing also up until very, very recently, I think it's women's golf now, but women's rowing used to be the easiest sport to get recruited to
Oh,
as
really?
well, digitally. And so like you'll get a lot of rowers in the US who don't even start rowing until they get to college.
Okay.
Right. So like when I was working at MSU last year, at Michigan State University last year,
Hmm.
um, one of our other coaches, she was in charge of just purely out of sport recruits.
Okay.
So she would travel around, she would go to basketball games, swim meets, or whatever
Oh,
it may
really?
be.
Like
Yeah,
fully
and be
just
like,
like taking people from other sports and
yeah, yeah, we're just poaching everybody.
you're
But
like a tall athletic person. Come row.
yeah, it'd be like you're 5'10. Are you gonna go do your sport at your desired college?
Hmm.
And if the answer is no, then okay, cool. Come try rowing.
Yeah.
And we'll bring you here and we'll give you money.
Hmm.
And so, and also too, like the women's rowing teams rosters are just depending on your conference because of Title IX stuff and having to balance out team sizes.
Hmm.
The women's rosters can be absolutely massive.
Hmm.
And so, with Michigan State having such an established football program and basketball program, we had a pretty high roster size. Um, I believe we had somewhere around 80 girls when we started in the
Hmm.
fall. And of course, that kind of dwindles down as cuts happen and the season progresses. But the opportunity to row at a school and also the number of spots is much, much greater
Hmm.
on the women's side. Um,
And does that
again,
make it more competitive?
I think that's tough. I think the depth is deeper on the women's side than it is on the men's side.
Hmm.
Um, and I think as well, like you have a larger variety of good coaches on the women's side than the men's side. And that's not to say that like there's not very, very good coaches on the men's side, right? Like people like Steve Gladstone at Yale or
Hmm.
previously at Yale. Um, but like just salary wise, there's a lot more money when
Hmm.
you go to the women's side because of NCAA stuff, it's a lot more spread out, and so like
Yeah.
that attracts better coaches a little bit more. And with just having so many people in on that team and in that division, it just naturally makes the competition greater.
Hmm.
Um, but again, that's not to say that on the men's side there still isn't very intense competition. I just don't think
Yeah.
it goes as deep
Yeah. Because
down as well as women's.
from my perspective, I guess as someone in the UK and in the rowing world, I hear a
Mhm.
lot more about IRAs and sort of like the duels and things like that that go on. And I don't really hear anything about the women's rowing in the US. Like it's kind of, I guess, behind a bit of a curtain. Like, do you know
Yeah, no,
what do you think about that?
yeah, no, I get that for sure. I think it's also just a thing too of like, you know, I think if you were a female rower, you'd probably pay more attention to NCAAs,
Hmm.
right? Same thing with, with us being men's rowers. Like,
Yeah.
of course, I was way more in tune with IRAs than
Yeah.
I ever was with NCAAs until I started coaching
Yeah.
an NCAA program. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I think a part of that too is just like I think it's a shame that universities don't put more effort into promoting their rowing teams.
Hmm.
Um, like I think a little bit more could be done on that end from university itself, from NCAA, from whatever networks that they work with,
Hmm.
television wise or whatever it may be. Like rowing's not a very
They have
spectator.
like insane budgets.
Yeah, yeah, it's absurd. Um, yeah, it's absurd. But again, like a lot of that money though too goes to the money making teams, which
Hmm.
is like football and basketball.
Yeah.
Right. Not saying that they need all the money that goes to them, but a lot of them does. A lot of it does. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just with rowing as a sport, it's one of those things of kind of like what you pay attention to more
Hmm.
versus what you don't. Right. Like I don't think rowing's at a point yet where like I could walk into any random store and ask somebody like, hey, like, what do you know about rowing?
Yeah.
right? Where I could go into any random store and ask somebody like, "Hey, what is volleyball?"
Hmm.
And they'd be able to tell me.
Yeah.
You know, um, so I think of that. I think it's more of just kind of like what you
Hmm.
peek into and what you don't.
Yeah.
But
But you were saying earlier, just before I started the podcast, if you're sort of from Boston, like the head of the Charles is part of your life, whether you like it or not. I think is what you said. Do you think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
do you think that's something that could be brought other places? So if you've got like the Windermere Cup in Washington and things like that, and the Crew
Mhm.
Classic in San Diego, do you think if those events grow, that could sort of spread the word of the sport, or do you think it's just because the head of the Charles has just been there for so long? That's why it's
Uh,
part of the community.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of both, right? Like Crew Classic has been there for a while as well, right? I
Mm,
think Heather Charles is just such a storied race and regatta, and you
mm,
have people from every like Brooks was there, like
yeah,
everybody comes, right? I
yeah,
think St. Paul's won it this past year,
mm,
um, and so I think just having such a massive people flock to one city for this one specific event,
mm,
just word spreads super
yeah,
easily, right? Like people know, like, okay, all of a sudden my, you know, family coffee shop now it's
mm.
400 people in it. Why are they here? Like
Yeah,
this is not
yeah,
a normal Friday afternoon.
mm,
Um, so I think these races have the capability to grow in other spots, but I think the toughest thing rowing will always face is that it's a 2,000-meter race
hmm,
and you can only watch like 15 seconds of it.
yeah,
And most of the time when you're watching, you're not very close,
yeah,
right? That's one of the things I love in Europe is when they do, and I believe they were doing this in the UK as well, is those 500-meter sprint leagues.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's amazing.
yeah, and that's something I've been doing a fair bit of like research into and looking into and
Yeah.
figuring out if I potentially somewhere down the line start something up over here. But I mean, I'm sure there's a lot that goes into it that would go straight over my head. But I think
I mean, you
things like
need a
that would
body of
just be
water and two
super
aids.
cool because they did do one in the UK. I don't know if you heard about. Oh my god, I can't even remember what it was called. Oh, what was it? I'm gonna look this up quickly. Uh, but they did some where they got teams from different cities, and they basically like drew people in from all different cities.
Oh,
Um,
I swear, didn't we have a couple guys on the squad who did that? Who
Yeah,
had
because
those
some people did
thingies?
it from like Oxford and for Oxford, and some people, I think someone did it from Manchester. The Power 8 sprints, that was it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and that was basically where they took a bunch of like. But I think the problem with that was so they did like interviews with the people and they sort of like created stories around the events, but they just got a bunch of like random people pretty much from
Yeah.
like different clubs and were like, hey, go and sit in a boat and pull hard. And like there was
Yeah.
no real like backstory. There was no like we've been training together for a year to win this. It was like 8 random people from different teams were like, sure, I'll like do some rowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I definitely think probably a little more infrastructure always helps. But no, but it's just still, I still think it's such a cool thing to do. And like,
Mm,
it feels like the US is so scared to change at
mhm.
all when it
Yeah.
comes to the sport. Like
Because a big
everything
part of
about
that
how,
was that it like ran through cities in places
yeah,
where people could see. So like
no, exactly.
it was like through canals or down rivers that are like through the center of the city where people
Yeah.
could like stand and watch. Whereas when you got 6 lane racing on a lake, it's like the lake has to kind of be in the middle of nowhere because where can you just have 2,000 meters worth of lake
Yeah.
and then like yeah, it's just hard to get to, hard to watch, and by the time you got sometimes 8 boats in a row against each other, that's like almost a kilometer across. Like you
Yeah.
can't see the other side of the lake. Like
No, yeah, no, exactly. And I think too, like, you know, it not only makes rowing more viable in more locations,
mhm,
again, like makes more spectator friendly, but it also just gets more athletes involved.
yeah,
Like an athlete who is going to be extremely successful at a 500-meter sprint
mhm,
is going to look a little bit different than an athlete who's extremely successful in a 2,000-meter race.
yeah.
Right. And so I
Or
think,
even I was talking to someone about this. Like when you look at stuff like Head of the River, there's like
yeah.
almost
Mhm.
8Ks or however long it is. I can't believe I don't know that as well. But it's a long way. And if you're watching from like Hammersmith Bridge, you can see like a minute of rowing tops,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's like a 20-minute race. And then you don't even find out who won until like that, like the evening after the race. It's like
Yeah.
it's not
No,
a
exactly.
spectator friendly sport.
Yeah, and I think that's what's holding it back, right? Like,
Hmm.
I was a swimmer for a long time. I don't really think swimming is that has this like wow factor that rowing doesn't when you're watching a race. I think it's just
Yeah.
you can watch an entire swim race.
Yeah.
You can see every part of it,
Hmm.
right? And you can again you get that direct feedback like, oh, athlete in lane 4, they won.
Yeah.
Right. It's not okay, let's wait 3 hours and eventually the times will populate
And even in
across the right.
regattas, like if you're watching it, if you're standing 250 meters down the track, like from the finish, you can't tell who won, even if you're
Oh
like
yeah.
in the last like tiny piece of the race. Like it could be anyone. Like even the dude in last, if you're looking at it at an angle, like, hey, that guy won. Oh wait, no, I was so far off from correct.
Yeah. No, yeah. The parallax, it really gets you.
Yeah.
You never know who's winning if you're at a specific angle.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, we'll see. I mean, I think, maybe LA will spark
Yeah.
some ideas around that. Like
And then you've
a
got
lot
beach
of
sprints coming up as well. I don't know if you've paid much attention to that.
yeah, I started to once I saw that.
Hmm.
I know that we had some athlete from the US who did a pretty stellar job at like a comeback win
Hmm.
in this past summer's World Championships, which I seen the highlights of that, and that was really cool to see. Um, but
And
that's not
there's a beach sprints league in the US as well, which I've
yeah.
paid a little bit of attention to. I don't know how big
Mhm.
that is. Have you sort of seen that and heard about that?
It's not. I wouldn't say it's super big,
Hmm.
just because I'm 100% immersed in the rowing world and I don't
Yeah.
hear too much about it. But again,
Yeah.
also like nobody I know directly rows coastal
Okay.
or like has competed in coastal or coached it or whatever. So like it just hasn't really been a part of my specific rowing world.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think it's just another example of things not being pushed properly or things not being advocated for
Hmm.
to the right extent. And then, it's part of our sport. And I don't even really know that much about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, maybe that's
And I
shame
guess
on
it
me.
is difficult in terms of you have to be on the coast to do it. So
Yeah,
it's like
no,
it is
exactly.
kind of narrowing who can do it. But then you have stuff like other sports like ice hockey or whatever, where
Hmm.
like well, not necessarily ice hockey, but say you got to do skiing. Like everyone knows what skiing is like, but
Yeah,
you can only do that where it's snowing.
no, yeah, exactly. I mean, I will say actually, where I used to ski in Michigan, um, Michigan skiing is terrible.
Mhm.
Where I used to ski, it was actually a massive trash dump.
Okay.
And so it was just a mound of trash,
Oh,
that
nice.
has some growth on it. And then they would make their own snow
Hmm.
and shoot that
That sounds
on the
nice.
trash mountain. And that was that was what we skied on. So
That's
people
going to
people
be
make
one
it
of the
work.
most
Whatever.
American things I've heard. Like full stop.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting experience for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't been there in a long time, and I probably will never go ever again. But it's yeah, people figure it out. Like,
Hmm.
and again, I think that's part of the shame too of like why rowing isn't as big. You just don't have as much people in it, and so then there's just less
Hmm.
minds working towards growing the sport. There's less people to oppose the people who are currently making decisions for the sport.
Hmm.
Um, it's just kind of like its own little bubble.
Hmm. And there was someone I was speaking to a month or so ago was saying like rowing doesn't really have like a fully amateur scene. Like you don't have people that just row for the fun of it. Like it's you row because you want to go and race. And he was saying like there are so many people that run that will just like go and run. And you don't have that opportunity with rowing because you need a boat and you need blades and you need someone to show you how to do it. Do you
Yeah.
think there's in my mind there's not really much you can do about it. But then you look
Mhm.
at things like F1 where you can't just like jump in an F1 car and drive it. So I think there's you've got to sort of find a line there between do I make this a fully consumer friendly involved sport, or do I make it a sport where it's less inclusive potentially, but you still get people engaged by making it interesting to watch?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think um actually the areas that I've been around, so Ann Arbor and then now Toga, and
Mm-hmm.
then some of the other places I've seen, they actually have pretty big masters programs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so masters rowing, I've heard two things. I've heard that you either can't do it until you're over 21 or that you can't do it until you're over 28. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure it's until you're over 28.
yeah, that
But
sounds more right.
yeah, I don't, it's not something I pay too much attention to, but it's one of those two restrictions. But I think that does a really good job of kind of adding that recreational factor. So like we have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of athletes here who are masters athletes, and like yeah, like they commit to a training schedule, and they'll go and race. But again, it's still for some of them, not all of them. Some of them are very much like I want to go compete, I want to win,
Mm-hmm.
yada yada yada.
Yeah,
But then you still have that group of people like, you know what, like I just love being on the water.
yeah.
Like I don't need to
Because
have a
if you
super
like,
nice,
yeah, if you live by a lake or a river
yeah,
and you just sort of like looking at it every day, it's like I want to be there. Like you're probably your first port of call is going to be like a paddleboard or a kayak because it's just like a floaty thing that you can sit in and go.
yeah.
Whereas a rowing boat is like you're going to fall in if you just jump in a rowing boat.
No, yeah, exactly. It's yeah, definitely takes a couple sessions to be able to just sit stable.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I've met many people who didn't start rowing until they were like in their 50s
Oh, really?
or 60s. Yeah. And again, a lot of it too, it's like you have to be in the right area. They have
Hmm.
to have a master's program.
Yeah.
But still, like people do it.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as, I'm just gonna go on a run or join a running group, but there is a presence there for
Yeah.
that, for sure.
And do you think that's an area of the sport that you could see building and sort of, I guess, a lot of people potentially look at cycling in a way. It's like, have you heard of like Mammal, like a middle-aged man in Lycra? And it, like
Mm-mm.
that's a sport that like attracts generally sort of older people, I guess, or like people
Yeah.
that are sort of situated and they've got like a life and then they go and do cycling in their spare time. Do you think
Yeah.
that's something that rowing could appeal to and sort of move in that direction?
Yeah, I think so. Again, like it has to be in the right spot, right?
Mhm.
And I think too, like the coaching needs to be adaptable for that group.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the way I coach juniors, what competitive level juniors
Hmm.
wouldn't be the same way I coached, or I would coach a group of people who just want to go out there and be on the water.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Mhm.
sit there and hammer on them to get their blades in quicker. So I think a lot of it has to do with that too. Of like, I think at a certain point, people just get attracted to environment,
Yeah.
right? No matter what you're doing.
Hmm.
Like, if the place is right, the time is right, and the people that are running the organization are, people you want to be around.
Hmm.
I think that adds a lot of pull.
Hmm.
So I do think it could get there for sure. I think it can continue to grow. Um, we do this really cool thing here. So Saratoga Rowing is a really big organization. So we
Hmm.
have our competitive juniors program, um, and then we have a competitive middle school program as well, right? Which isn't like, I say competitive because they compete, but like the goal of that program isn't to, make these kids Olympians by the time that they're 12 years old.
Yeah.
It's it's to get them involved in the sport, see if they have any interest, and then as they get older, the intensity rises.
Hmm.
And then we have a master's program, and then we also have the Orion program, and
Hmm.
the Orion program is the um, advanced. It stands for Advanced Rowing Initiative of the Northeast, and
Hmm.
so a lot of these athletes are either currently rowing on the U.S. national team or vying for a spot on the team. And
Hmm.
so when I mentioned that double and that quad earlier, who did really well at Worlds this past summer,
Yeah.
one of the athletes from the quad rows here, and then one of the athletes from that double rows here as well.
Oh, okay.
But we do this really cool thing in the fall where we have these races. They're two home races, and all of the programs race at it, and it's only
Mhm.
us. So
Okay.
like the middle school boats will go, the junior boats will go, the masters will go, the Ryan athletes will go. And the way we do it is we base it off of your ending time, comparing it to the GMS time, the gold medal standard time of our
Yeah.
biggest race in the fall. And whoever's the closest to that wins, which adds
Okay.
just like really cool variety of like, of course, out of all those groups, the men's junior varsity 1v8 is going to be the fastest boat.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But if the men's varsity, 1v8 got 90% GMS
Mm-hmm.
and the middle school girls cock squad got 95% GMS,
Yeah.
they beat that 8.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I just kind of sidetracked a little bit, but like going back to the original question, like I think having events like that as well, where the entire community is involved,
And it
you
sort of
get,
puts it into perspective as well. Like these
yeah,
people are still trying hard.
no, exactly. And then too, like you get the families of the juniors and the middle schoolers, and you get the
Mm-hmm.
families of the masters, whoever, and then all of a sudden all these people are at the rowing venue,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it's like, okay, like, hey, like, my friend Joe, who's 39, came to that race last weekend.
Mm-hmm.
He really thought it was cool. He wants to try.
Yeah.
Or you get some middle school parent who's like, oh, you know what? I have a kid who just entered 6th grade. I think they would really enjoy this. Let's sign them up, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I do think like with the right type of uh race and the right type of environment, like you'll gain support through that, and like we'll increase those squad sizes too.
And you sort of mentioned earlier on as well that there's only sort of 3 or 4 like main competitions. Do you think there's room in like the rowing calendar for more competition? Like, do you think we could move to a place where the sport is moving, where you have a race every weekend rather than maybe every other weekend or sometimes like once a month? Do you think you could have that, or do you think because people's training programs don't work in that way, that's never going to happen?
That's a good question. I mean, I think people are going to adapt to whatever the situation is. Good, sorry, not people. Good coaches will adapt to the situation is, right? You have some coaches who are going to do the same thing that they've been doing since the 70s, and they're never going to change.
Yeah.
But I definitely do think there's room for stuff like that. Like there is quite a bit of racing opportunities depending on where you're at, right? But I do think at the collegiate level, like they could have a sculling championship, right? They could do that in the fall. You could have one championship in the fall. It's here's all your sculling events. Then you have your championship in the spring. Here's all your sweep events, and so on and so forth. The one system I really like is the Canadian national, or not Canadian national team, the Canadian collegiate system. So one of the teams I was actually talking to before I came to Brooks was University of Victoria, which is one of the top teams in Canada. And the way that their season operates is they have their championship is in the fall, is their national championship. And then they have a dual race in the middle of the year, which is like this massive duel between them and University of British Columbia, which is like they're essentially the top 2 programs in Canada.
I think British Columbia came over to Henley last year or the year before. When
I think they usually come every.
I think they came over for the Temple.
In
the year that I did that.
No, they've had a couple boats that have gone over there as well. Again, like both programs are pretty stellar. Then they have another big race in the spring too. I can't remember exactly what it is, but like all of those events are super hyped up, which kind of keeps people in the loop throughout the year.
Yeah.
Right. Where I feel like versus here, people aren't going to really pay attention to rowing probably until like, I don't know, like March. You know what I mean? Because that's what like.
I think that's the same in the UK as well. Like you have the head of the river, and that's really the first big race of the year, and that's in March.
Yeah.
And like at the end of March as well. And then and that's like the last head race of the year as well. So you have the whole head season where it's kind of just like small local races pretty much. You have like Force Head as well, but and a few others like on the Tideway, but all the main ones are just like there's like 3 or big races in London, and the other ones are just like local.
Yeah, I definitely think more could be done on that front. Like again, I will always be biased towards sculling, and I
Hmm.
honestly think I think everybody should be biased towards sculling, but like, there's no reason that there shouldn't be a sculling championship as well,
Yeah.
or something like that, or you know what I mean? Because again, it keeps people more engaged throughout the year, but then it also lets different athletes compete at a high level versus just whoever's
Hmm.
going to sit in the eight,
Hmm.
right? Because making the eight is different than making the quad,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. So no, I think there's room. Um, will it ever happen? Who knows? I mean, I guess right now you have Head of the Charles, and then you have Crash Bees
Hmm.
in the winter. I feel like that's actually kind of died down a little bit since I was in high school. I don't really hear as much about
So
that.
what are crash bees? Sorry.
So Crash Bees, I don't know too much about how it actually all operates, but it's like this
Mhm.
massive indoor erg race, like
Okay.
huge, huge race.
Hmm.
And like winning, it's a pretty big deal. Um, but
What
I
sort of
think
teams do you see going out and doing that?
yeah, I mean, you'll see a whole bunch. Like you'll
Hmm.
see scholarship programs, junior programs, college.
Okay.
You'll see everybody. You'll see a lot of international people, whatever it may be.
Hmm.
You'll see some teams who will just send one kid
Hmm.
or whatever it is. So it's a pretty wide variety. But I feel like even that has kind of been dying down.
Yeah.
And so like again, you have your two main points. If you have Charles, and then you have nationals.
Yeah.
And Charles too is one of those where like I think it's a really big deal if you're in Boston and or if you're racing there or whatever it may be, but like it doesn't hold the same type of weight as you winning
Hmm.
NCAA's
Mm.
in the spring, right? Or
Yeah.
IRAs. Like, I think a lot of times too, like you'll see these teams who will go and they'll win the champ eight in the college category, or they'll win the college eight, whatever, and they will
Mm.
not be the team that wins
Yeah.
at the end of the spring season.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think there's like a similar situation in the UK in that you've got like the head of the river in March, and then there's like
Mhm.
nothing until May, really. And then you've got three regattas
Yeah.
back to back, like where it's the Met Regatta, you've got Marlow Regatta, and then you've got Henley, which is obviously the big one.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
really through the winter, it's all like local races. There's not that much competition. And then even through spring, you've got the head of the river, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
And I think there's, like you're saying, there's definitely room for more to go on. And I guess you'll have a lot of coaches that will say, yeah, well, you need to train through the winter. But it's like
Yeah.
everyone hates the winter season because you're just sat on the herb doing
Well, I think that's
erging.
I like a big part of my coaching is simplicity,
Hmm.
right? And you know, I've been so lucky to have um Kit Bennett, who was my high school coach.
Hmm.
I worked for him for a little bit, and we're very close.
Hmm.
Um, but to have him as a mentor, because that's one of his big things, right? And that's a big thing with Henry too,
Yeah.
right? It's simple. Here's a training plan. This is
Hmm.
what needs to be done at this pace to get you to X speed, whatever
Yeah.
it may be, and let's just go do it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think here you just get a whole lot of coaches who try to overcomplicate it
Hmm.
and destroy their athletes with mileage. Because we're like,
Yeah.
okay, like if we're not doing 500K a week on the erg, then we're gonna suck forever, right?
Yeah.
And so you do have those mentalities of like, no, we can't race more because we have to make sure that we're training properly. Like that messes up our training cycle.
Hmm.
Um, but then again, like you look at Brooks, and I think Brooks honestly opposes that quite well because Brooks is insanely dominant, and
Hmm.
everybody knows it, right? On the men's side, and now the women's side as well,
Hmm.
right? Not that I don't think the women were ever bad, but like they've made these massive strides over the past couple of years.
Hmm.
Um, again, it's a simple training plan,
Yeah.
right? We're not like I think the longest steady state erg we ever did was like 16 to 18K.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, like you if you want to go to U23 Worlds or whatever, like yes, that takes more training.
Hmm.
And you want to win Henley, like yes, that takes a little bit extra training, but like as a whole squad, we were pretty quick. Not everybody's doing too much outside of what
Hmm.
is already written.
I remember we were always joking when we were in the same boat. We were in the 5 view, and we're like, we're the fastest 5e in the world.
No, I know exactly. And it's true. Anybody could pull up. Yeah. No, that's my claim to fame.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Used to be in the fastest 5e in the world.
yeah.
But yeah,
It
and then,
was
yeah, like I
it
just
was that because, I think it was even like definitely even that year, like everything was so close
yeah.
because we all did the same training. Like everyone showed up, everyone did 18K,
Mhm.
everyone did a half hour, everyone did like hard like 2.8s. It was just like hard training all the time,
Yeah.
but it wasn't stupid. It wasn't like you have to do like if you're dying, like get off the erg. Like
Yeah,
just don't
exactly. And
bother.
like I think that's something I really appreciated was like it felt really streamlined and it felt like we all knew exactly where we were going.
Mm-hmm. It
Right. Like I
was like
could,
from day one, it was like we're all gonna race a Henley.
yeah, right. And we could tell you, it could be October. I could tell you what we're going to be doing on some random Tuesday in April,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's again like it's that simple. And
Yeah.
like I've always liked that training method more of like higher intensity for shorter distance
Mm-hmm.
versus I'm not talking about like of course like you're still doing like at least like 12K on the erg steadies or whatever, but like that overdoing 25, 30K
Mm-hmm.
at a much slower pace.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason too why the Brooks team is so big
Mm-hmm.
is because you're not sitting in practice every day for 4 hours
Yeah.
at a rate 18. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like we get in, we get our work done, and then we go home.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's just like a couple hours a day.
Yeah.
But equally to sort of hit those higher levels, so the guys that like winning the ladies' plates and going on to the national team, they'll be training and obviously more.
Yeah.
But I think as an absolute baseline, like the guys that show up in their freshman year and they're like joining the team and they just do the program and they work hard on the program, they're going to do what they're going to race at Henley. They might make a couple of days through Henley,
Yeah.
like the absolute like bottom of the squad. I think we had like 8 boats in the top 15 ahead of the river.
Yeah. It's just so insane to say that. And like again, it's just like I don't understand why people don't see that. And they're like, okay, like why don't we try that?
Mm,
Like before I even came into Brooks, like I had stopped rowing maybe like a year and a half.
mhm,
And then within 4 months at Brooks, I was faster than I ever was in high school.
mhm.
Right. And again, it's just that training model. I think it's just so efficient. And it
And
like it keeps you wanting.
yeah, yeah. And you were talking about the men's team at Michigan,
Yeah.
and how they're hugely dominant. Was
Mhm.
that? Do you know about that program?
Yeah. So I actually coached that program for a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, a very, very short amount of time. Um, before I got the job at Michigan State, I was the freshman coach at U of M for like 2 months. So I ran all the recruiting and all that stuff. Um, I really love that program. I love the guys who are there. I love my boss, Greg Hartstuff, who's the head coach there. Um, I just got an offer I couldn't refuse.
Hmm.
But I think a big reason why they're as dominant as they are is again like it reminds me a lot of Brooks in that sense. Of course, like I've been around Michigan men since I was a freshman in high school.
Hmm.
Um, but it's very similar to Brooks in that sense of that like Greg's training plan is consistent
Hmm.
and he's not trying to overcomplicate workouts or overtrain the guys.
Yeah.
Right. Like like he's got it down to such a science. Like he knows exactly what they have to do
Hmm.
every year to be competitive at ACRA, right? To compete for a national championship, not just to go and like, oh, we're gonna hang out and get dead last.
Yeah.
Like that whole plan is geared towards like we're gonna go and we're gonna win. Um, and so I think having that consistent and two, like he's been the only men's coach
Hmm.
there. Like that's his program. I actually think, and this might be wrong, I think he's the longest tenured coach at Michigan now
Okay.
after the basketball coach retired. Um, but like again, everything's consistent, it's simple, and like when you have that type of programmatic success it doesn't, you can throw anybody into that system, and if they want to work,
Hmm.
they're going to be decent.
Yeah.
Right. Because again, with it being a club program, like they can't call, Ben from the UK and be like, hey, do you want to come row for us?
Hmm.
Because we can't offer you any money.
Yeah.
Right. It'd be great if you want to come row for Michigan men, but like you have to pay your way to get here.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that recruiting just comes from kids on campus.
Hmm.
Right. That's not saying like, yeah, we'll get kids from, outside of Michigan who know about Michigan men and really want to row for this program, and like, they'll figure out and they'll come over through whatever means they need to.
Hmm.
Um, but majority of those guys we just find roaming
Hmm.
around the school. Um, I think that just goes to speak volumes of how good of a job Greg does, because he's taking these people who, a lot of them don't even know what rowing is
Yeah.
before they like get kidnapped into one of our info meetings, and then now all of a sudden they're a national champion a
Yeah.
year later,
Yeah.
right?
And you said to make that more competitive, the coach literally wrote a book with the whole program in detail and just sent it to everyone.
Yeah, it's on the Accra website. It's
Hmm.
on there. So like he's on the board. He created Accra. So Michigan. So the big story with Michigan men. So before there was Accra, everybody raced at IRAs.
Hmm.
Whether you were a club team or a varsity program, no matter what, you raced at IRAs, right? So there was a time where Michigan men were racing Washington men.
Yeah.
So not to say they were ever faster than Washington men, but there was a time when they were racing Washington men.
Yeah.
And the reason Accra got started was because Michigan got kicked out of IRAs, and same with all the other club teams. They did all the club programs at once, but it's because of Michigan, because Michigan was beating varsity programs. And so then these coaches come back to their school, and their athletic directors are like, what the hell? How do you get beat
Yeah.
by a team that literally has no funding from the university?
Yeah.
And it's like, there's no recruits or anything. It's like, how did you lose to this team?
Hmm.
Um, so to avoid that and potentially having their programs lose funding or,
Yeah.
lose their varsity status, the IRA board decided to cut club rowing out.
Yeah.
And so Greg was part of that process too. So like, I think that's another reason why he wrote that book, was not only because like, again, like Accra's kind of like his baby.
Hmm.
So not only to like, you know, help increase competitiveness, but also to just like teach, right? Of
Yeah.
like, this is what I've done for so long.
Yeah.
And like, this is all the success I've had. Like, read this, look
Yeah.
at it. Like, again, I don't think there's one clear exact path for any program to follow to become quick,
Yeah.
right?
Of course.
It all depends on your athletes, depends on your coaching sound, a lot of stuff. But like, you can still take from others, right? I was talking to
Of
one of the
course.
other assistants here the other day. I was like, if I'm lucky, I might have like 3 original thoughts about coaching my entire coaching career, right? And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. It's just like, yeah, like this sport is simple.
Yeah. And I
Like,
do remember when I was coaching as well, like we'd be focusing on the catch and training, and Henry would be like, here's this drill. And then I'd
yeah,
go down to coaching and I'd watch my guys and be like, actually, yeah, their catches are pretty slow. Let's do this drill.
yeah,
It just makes sense. Like, especially if you're being coached and then I did this drill and now my blade's just going in. And like
yeah.
I understand that and I understand how it works. And then you can so much easier like explain and put that onto other people. Whereas if you're just like coming up with stuff, it could go either wrong or it could
Yeah.
like make it worse, or like, yeah, I don't know. Even if it does work, there's not much to it. It's like you put your blade in the water, you pull the handle, and then you take it out of the water, and then you do it again. Like there's
Yeah.
only so much you can do. So if you find something that's good, just like do it. There's no
Oh,
reason.
exactly. And I think like there's no secrets.
Yeah.
Like, share information, right?
Mhm.
Like, communicate with other coaches. Like my coach back again, like Kit, he's still Kit is with established as he is, amount of national championships he's won. He's coached for the US junior national team, and now he's running U23 so dev program, and like he still goes and visits other programs,
Mhm.
right? For the sense that like, he's networking and all that as well, but like just to keep his skills sharp. That
Yeah.
was one of the biggest things I loved about when I was at MSU was, so I was in charge of all the recruits in Michigan and Ohio
Mhm.
directly, and then international stuff was a little bit more whoever you find. But like my specific role was Michigan and Ohio.
Mhm.
Um, so I was able to go and sit in a lot of launches of high school coaches around the area,
Yeah.
and like I would always learn something,
Mhm.
right? Whether I agree with everything that this coach does, or whether I think that might not be the exact way I would articulate it, but like I'm always trying to take it's always trying to take something, and like it's it's such an easy thing to do. And like like going back to Kit, like Kit would outcoach me 10 out of 10 times every day of the week, whatever class.
Mhm.
Like Kit and I can sit in the launch and he can hear me say something and he
Mhm.
might mention like, oh, like I haven't thought about it like that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's you know what I mean? Like I haven't wrote in the X amount of time. Like I forgot that's how that feels,
Mhm.
whatever it
Yeah.
may be.
Yeah.
So like I do think it's a shame when people don't take advantage of those situations or like resources like Greg has provided
Mhm.
of like you don't have to tell anybody you read it,
Yeah.
right? You don't have to tell anybody. You're just I mean, it's good. You should give credit when it's due, but like if that's your MO, like you can keep it to yourself.
Mhm.
Like why not use information that works?
Yeah. And do you think that sharing stuff like that is important for the future of the sport?
Oh, 100%. Um, there's actually this coach. I won't name the team, but there's this coach last year who is very big, and this is in the college realm,
Mhm.
who's very big of not posting pictures or videos of their program because they
Mhm.
don't want people to see how they row and try to copy it. It's like that's like the dumbest thing
Yeah.
I've ever heard, right?
Totally.
Like I think again, not it's always going around the point like this sport is simple, right? You're
Yeah.
not some astrophysics genius because you know how to place the blade in or
Mhm.
whatever. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
share the wealth. Let's try to get everybody up on the same page so that we can rise or raise the quality of rowing throughout the entire country instead of like, let me just have this one little bubble of dominance
Mhm.
and leave everybody else in the dust. Because I think that's another thing you get with rowing is like, because it's not as big of a sport,
Mhm.
you get a lot of people who don't join till later in life and then, they start coaching or whatever, which is fine, which is 100% fine. But it's just like, they might not know as much,
Yeah.
you
And do you
know?
think at what level do you think it's sort of okay to stop sharing that? So I guess if you're on the national team, you probably don't want to be out there sharing your program with other national teams, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think stuff like that is depending on kind of where you're at, changes what needs to be said and what doesn't need to be said. Like, I think if I'm sitting in like, if I went to go visit, um, Mike Tatey,
Hmm.
who runs California Rowing Club and has used to be the men's senior team coach and the Cal head coach. And I sat on a launch with him and I was asking him a question and he told me he wouldn't tell me because it's a secret.
Yeah.
I'd be like, this is why.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like I also don't think too like the whole world doesn't need to know what's going on in every single national team division. Like I think it was Mahe,
Hmm.
or maybe it was one of the maybe it was Hamish, one of the guys in the pair. But didn't they like break some world record? But it was like kept a secret the whole time until they actually raced. Or it might
Really?
have been Mahe in his 2K, like what his actual 2K time was.
I didn't know that, but that sounds believable.
Yeah, I think I heard something about like I think stuff like that is fine. But I think
Hmm.
when it comes down to point of like, you know, how can I again, like it's country versus country, so I think that's a little bit different. But like
But
I go
equally, like if Mahe had told everyone, "Hey, I've got the record," what are they gonna do? Also, just go and get the record?
yeah, I mean I don't think it changes anything. But like, you know, if you're trying to say more under the radar or whatever, like
Hmm.
I can see sides to both. I
Yeah.
don't think there's any reason to gatekeep any sort of information
Hmm.
on this realm of like again, like in that level of like, wow, your crew has insane catches.
Hmm.
How did you get them to row like that?
Yeah. And I
Right.
think there's like to make rowing more engaging for people outside of rowing as well. Like that sort of stuff definitely needs to be shared because if you watch something like I don't know if you've watched like Drive to Survive and things like that, like you need to understand what's going on. And rowing is like there's not much to it, so it wouldn't take much to explain, I don't think.
No, exactly. Like any coach who tells you any coach who needs to, they want to keep these secrets and they think that like they know everything about rowing and nobody else
Mhm.
can compare to them. Like, no, that coach is an idiot.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I could never imagine Henry ever saying, I know more than every other coach.
Hmm.
I am the smartest person alive.
Yeah.
Right. And I have heard coaches talk like that. And so like, but like the ones who are at that level, like most of the time they don't. And I think, even last year, Kit went and visited Dave O'Neill,
Hmm.
absolutely legendary coach right now, coaching the head coach of Texas, on the women's side. And he was singing along with him, and he was like, yeah, nothing Dave was saying was that new to him because Dave, again, he follows that same process of like, let's just keep it simple.
Yeah.
Like, keep it to what actually matters.
Hmm.
Like, I don't need to overcomplicate things.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think like when I know when I was watching or when I was coaching down at the Oxford colleges, that's a
Mhm.
space where you, as an athlete and as a rower, you're in an environment where you're all on the same path, and there's
Yeah.
like it's the most crowded spot that I've ever seen any rowing ever
We
before. You
actually,
spend like 10 minutes at the end of each like 3K loop waiting to spin. It's ridiculous. But
yeah.
you hear so many other coaches talking and explaining things, and sometimes you'll like cycle past them and go, what on earth is that guy talking about? Like you have just
Yeah.
like ruined that guy's chance at getting good at rowing, like because you've just said that to him.
Yeah.
And
No, yeah,
and
exactly.
like you hear some stuff and it's like just coaches will stand there and like hold their athletes as well and just talk at them for like half an hour. And it's like I think there needs to be a place where you can just say, hey, go rowing, and like if your blade's going in slow, like just try and put your blade in faster and see what happens. You know what I mean? It's like I think
Yeah.
there are situations where you don't even have to coach in a way, and I think
Mhm.
that's a big part of it. Just sort of understanding your own way of rowing and training, and understanding your own body. So I think that's a way where if you're getting way too detailed and way too specific to the point where you can't share anything with anyone, like that's not going to work for everyone.
Yeah. No, 100%. Um, I mean, I've definitely have raced and coached against strokes that I'm like, I would never have my crew do that.
Hmm.
But I've also been beating my crews who row
Oh
like
yeah.
that, right? Like, as long as all 8 people are doing the same thing,
Hmm.
you're gonna go probably decently fast,
Hmm. Because I
right?
remember it was like the 2017 St. Paul's crew that won like
Yeah.
everything, and it was like the most successful like schoolboy crew ever.
Hmm.
And they had like a bit of a goofy style.
Yeah.
Like they would sit like bolt upright at the finish, and everyone was like, "What the hell are they doing?" But they won everything, and there's no
Yeah.
denying they're like one of the best schoolboy crews that's ever like gone down the track at a race. And I think you just have to sort of take that into consideration. Like, there's not going to be like you can't scientifically prove that this is the best way to row because it's not.
Yeah. No, exactly. And like, yeah. I mean, you look at the Brooks stroke. Stroke was extremely simple,
Hmm.
right? We row with fat twos and emphockers. It's a heavy load. Just really yam it off the front end and keep your blade in the water, and you're good to go. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it's like I've had people asking that question too of like, what makes Brooks so fat? Like, what are they doing that nobody else is doing?
Hmm.
And it's just that we're not doing all the extra stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we're just doing what actually has to be done, and like what matters to make you fast, right? It was the
Hmm.
same way it was in high school versus like, let me add my own insane twist I just made up in my head last night at 9 p.m. and see what happened.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and that's not to say like you shouldn't be innovative and you shouldn't use your own ideas, but like I think people try to get too crazy with it.
Mm. And you get stuff like random foils and things like that,
Yeah.
and like science being done on like the um like literally looking at like the like biology of like an athlete and the like biomechanics, and that's so hard to do because everyone's body is so different and everyone's going to work differently. And
Yeah.
like if you're on a lake or if you're on a river or if there's a stream or if it's windy, like everything's going to change. It's such a like a variable sport, but ultimately like you're just going to have to do more or less the same thing. So
Yeah.
I think it's at a point where you can't get too scientific with it. Like I guess in things like cycling, 90% of it is okay, can we make the bike lighter and can we make it more aerodynamic? And then other than that, you're just spinning your legs around in a circle. I think it's fair. Surely it's fairly similar with rowing in that like you can make the boat lighter and you can make it more streamlined and you can make it like I don't know what else, but there can't be that much to it. It's just about spinning the blade in the water and making it go through as fast as you can.
Yeah. I mean, you'll get some coaches who are super obsessed with like rigging,
Mm-hmm.
how the pitch is set, what's the foot plate angle at, and all
Yeah.
that stuff. I'm like, I think there's a time and a place for that,
Mm-hmm.
but I also think that time and place is at a very, very elite level of rowing.
Yeah. If you've been
Right.
in a boat for like 6 months,
Yeah.
you need to find out that one thing that's not quite going right before you're perfect.
No, exactly. Like these high school, like, I run the U17 women's team, and so like I deal with a lot of younger athletes as well. And like
Mm-hmm.
if they jump when we first start jumping in boats in the fall, like my initial thoughts aren't, oh, okay, they're rowing like crap. How can I change the rigging to make them row better?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
how can I change?
But there are definitely people that do think that.
Yeah, and I think that like it's just like I think it's kind of a rabbit hole, right? Because nothing's
Oh
ever
yeah.
going to be tweaked
Mm-hmm.
exactly to perfection. Like you're gonna see it one way, then be like, okay, like what if it was maybe a little bit more angled that way, or what if it was a little more angled back, or what if
Mm-hmm.
I changed 5 seat this time instead of or whatever it may be. And again, that's not to there 100% is a time and a place for stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in a more general sense, like that's the last thing
Oh yeah.
that you should be looking at,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if I'm having trouble holding my body over as I drive,
Mm-hmm.
like changing my foot plate angle isn't going to magically just fix my problem
Yeah.
or whatever it may be, right? So
And
like I
like
mean,
if you're doing something like the day of a race and it's like an emergency situation, like oh shit, it's really windy. I need to raise the gates so I'm not like clotting my
yeah,
blade into waves. That makes sense. But
yeah,
if it's like just changing, I don't know, like you said, like the pitch of the gate, like that's not going to make a huge difference. I remember something that Henry used to do with me. It's like I was always rowing too long, so he'd just get my pin and move it all the way out. And it's
yeah.
like it was either in or out. There wasn't like a oh wait, I need to move it like 4 millimeters out. It was like just put it all the way out. You're not going to row long anymore.
Yeah, I think the thing that would always stress me out so much about ever rigging at Brooks was that we couldn't adjust our spacers on the water because of the telemetry.
Yeah,
So like then it's just this guessing game for like I mean eventually you get the
you
hang
just
of
like
it.
look at it and go,
Yeah. Like I
yeah.
think that could work. And then you get on the water
You're like, oh
and
no, that was wrong.
yeah, your handle's in your neck because of whatever it may be, and then you can't do anything about it.
Yeah,
So
you just have to firm it.
but yeah, but like again, like I can't think of a time where I ever saw Henry sitting around like finagling with boats for hours or whatever.
Unless it's like the week before Henley and something's not
Yeah.
gone quite right, and he'll have an absolute stress about it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. Like I mean, like even this past fall, right now, like I have a very wide range of athletes
Mhm.
in my squad currently, and like we were able to get the job done at the end of the season with capping it off with a win at Head of the Fish, which is like one of the biggest regattas in the US in the fall.
Okay.
And we won the New Hampshire State Championship. And I've never once touched the rigging in that boat.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's standardized and that's it. Right.
Yeah.
And I have athletes of various athletic ability, various sizes, didn't change anything. It's like, let's row well and see what happens.
Yeah.
Versus
I remember when I was coaching, I'd like told this girl the whole season, like, you need to rock over more. You need to rock over
yeah.
more. And we got to like bumps, which is like the biggest race for them. And she
Mhm.
still wasn't doing it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna get your foot plate and just move it like all the way down to the bottom, just so you're not like
Yeah.
so you're rocking over. And it's like if that's it, then that's kind of fine. But like I didn't really look at anything other than that, like because there wasn't much to it. They were in
Yeah.
like buckets as well. Like it wasn't like
Yeah.
if you're looking at like a junior rower and they're in like a 20-year-old Janasek, like changing the pitch of the gate isn't going to fix their rowing.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think part of it too is like I don't, and I'll be the first to admit it. My knowledge in rigging is not that vast,
Mhm.
right? Like I know enough. Like I know how to what generally we should be sitting at, and like how to like when I'm looking at a crew, like kind of be able to tell slightly what's going wrong. But I'm no by any means an expert in that area at all. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm not an expert in any of these areas, but like in that area especially. Um, and so that's also just another point of like why I don't go towards it as much is because I don't know as much about it.
Mhm.
But then too, like I've still found a lot of success without ever worrying about that. But like
Yeah.
even last year when I was at MSU, I was a fours coach, and so I coached the first four through the fourth four,
Mhm.
and I would I never played around with their stuff. Like,
Mhm.
like little tweaks here and now and then, like you have athletes at that level who are a little bit more specialized or whatever it may be. Um, but like it was never a point of like I need to sit here for the next 4 weeks and change everything about the
Yeah.
rigging. Like
Mhm.
that's what's gonna bridge this gap between us and
Mhm.
the teams that are quicker than we are right now.
Yeah. And that was a thing at Brooks as well, like because you're moving seat every single session,
Yeah, yeah,
you can't like set up your seat. Like you'd get people, although you get people that would try it and like they'd like spend 10 minutes every session changing their footplate because they've moved to a different seat. And it's like
yeah,
each boat is also completely different as well. Like you'll sit in one boat and it'll set really high or really low or whatever. And you're
yeah,
like guessing, yeah, I'll put it up for today. I just feel like it. That feels right.
yeah. No, those boats definitely were not rigged for people at my height. I don't, I don't think. I'll never forget. I forgot what race it was at. I think we were in London, um, and we were walking the boat down, and the boat was about right here on my head. And I'm pretty sure maybe it was Will who was our cox at the time. I don't remember who it was, but I was just walking next to them.
Yeah.
It's like I can't. I'm not 6'8". I can't. I'm not doing anything here. I'm not going to pretend like I'm helping carry this boat. Um, but again, like not saying that that's the ideal scenario, but like it stuff works, right? Like
Yeah.
there's certain things that definitely all your time and focus needs to go into, and there's certain
Mhm.
things that like it could go into, but is that really going to yield the benefit
Yeah.
of how
If
much
you
you're
change
putting
the
into it?
pitch or you just like pull 1% harder, what's going to make more of a difference?
Yeah, no, exactly. So I mean, I'm sure that there's things I was doing wrong with my rigging that maybe somebody else would see and be like, do that differently. But like Henry never said anything like that,
Hmm.
you know. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't. It's one of those things where I think you either really want to be into it
Yeah.
and that that's your thing and that's great, or it's just like you don't really have to go that deep if you don't want to.
Hmm.
Like it's not going to make that big of a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, well, I'll sort of wrap it up here. My computer's flashing at me and all sorts going on.
Yeah.
Fans screaming. But yeah, it's been great to speak to you. Hope everything's sort of all going all well in Saratoga.
Saratoga. It was close. It
Saratoga,
was
yeah.
good. Saratoga
Hope
sounds
it's all
nice though.
going well.
Yeah. Oh,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, and hopefully I'll sort of catch up with you again soon.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I had a great time. I appreciate you having me on here. And yeah, definitely let's do it again soon.
Nice one.
All right. See you,
Cheers,
man.
bye.